Welcome to the Parenting with Impact podcast with your hosts Elaine, Taylor-Klaus, and Diane Dempster, co-creators of ImpactParents.com, an online community, award-winning blog, and service organization helping parents all over the world to raise complex kids become capable, independent adults.
Hi everyone, Elaine and Diane here, and we know that you want your complex kids to grow up to be happy and independent, and yet you're not always sure how or when to help with that.
In this podcast, we'll encourage you to collaborate with all kinds of complex kids and support them in navigating life and learning.
And we'll interview leading experts from around the world, as well as parents in our own community, talking about how training for parents actually helps these complex kids.
We'll talk about the issues we hear parents struggling with all the time and how a coach approach can support and empower your amazing young people.
We won't tell you what to do. We're going to help you figure out how. So let's move on to the next conversation. Welcome, Nicola. It's great to have you.
Thank you so much, Elaine and Diane. I'm so excited to be with you guys and to come and talk a little bit more about pathological demand avoidance.
So let's just dive in and have a fabulous conversation. Shall we do that?
Yeah.
Excellent. So let me start in the way of introduction. Okay, so we have invited Nicola Reekie here today because she is kind of, if you look in the virtual world, there's this diagnosis, for lack of a better word, called PDA, officially titled Pathological Demand Avoidance. It comes out of autism research that was done in the UK, I think about 20 years ago. It is not a specific diagnosis, it's actually a presentation of autism. So it's a subset of autism, if you will. And it is marked, and we're going to talk a lot more about that today, obviously, but it is basically marked when we see complex kids or adults who have a tendency to resist a demand or an expectation to a point where it really is interfering with life and can make life a little complicated. Then there is this presentation of autism called PDA. I've been watching this situation for years. This is not, for those of you in the US, this is not an official diagnosis in the United States yet. There are now a half dozen or so providers in the United States who do recognize it and are beginning to diagnose it, but it is not yet in the DSM in the United States. But it is recognized in the UK and in Australia. And you can find some podcast episodes about it. We've started to try to address it. I've been trying to address it for years, and we've been identifying it in a lot of our clients in our community, encouraging them to go back for reevaluation because I recognized it in one of my kids years ago. So we'll talk about that later. But about 5 years ago, this dynamic woman named Nicola Reekie came onto the scene in the public space, I guess right around the time of the pandemic, or maybe just before the pandemic.
During it.
And began to support parents specifically about their PDA journey, whether the parents had it or whether their kids had it. She's in the UK, and for 5 years, she's been doing an annual summit to help parents and providers get a handle on how to best support people with PDA. Because, you can imagine it's very difficult to support somebody whose default is to resist any support, right? She's got a background as a young woman. She was diagnosed with dyslexia and dyspraxia, and then actually wasn't even receiving her own adult diagnoses until after she'd been doing this for a few years. So I'm sure she'll tell us about that. She does have background as a neurolinguistic coach and reflexology, but I know her as the PDA guru. And so she's got a PDA Space, and she does amazing work educating people about PDA. And so it's a true pleasure to have you here with us, Nicola. Nicola, welcome and thank you for the work that you're doing in the world and for bringing your expertise to our community. One more thing I want to say in the way of introduction. I know that this is an ADHD summit, and we all know that there are a lot of kids with ADHD who also have autism and vice versa. And the correlation between the two is very high. I often say that if you've got a kid with straight ADHD, often what you're going to get with this kind of a behavior is an ODD diagnosis. If you've got a kid with autism, you're going to get a PDA presentation. The manifestation is not dissimilar. It's about control and about resistance to expectations and demands. And so, Nicola, welcome. Thank you again. And let's start by, once you kind of speak yourself into the room and help people understand what brought you to be doing this work.
I'm blushing with your real kind words. And yes, I'll explain why I set up the PDA Space and created the first summit in the summer of 2020. I just want to clarify, in the UK, where PDA comes as a profile of autism.
Profile, right?
And I appreciate that every country has got language is very different. And there are different issues regarding within the UK. So I'm based in Wales. Our NHS, National Health Service, are not always agreeing and accepting a PDA diagnosis. So some families are having to say the young person is autistic or adult is autistic with a demand avoidant profile. My issue or my way around this is to say, when people say, oh, but PDA doesn't exist, is to say, okay, well, the behaviors, the characteristics, what we're seeing exists.
Right.
So let's not worry then about the terminology. Let's look at how we can create support and understanding. I did it because we endeavored to get a diagnosis for my eldest son, who is now 16, and kept being told, no, he wasn't autistic. He just was really anxious. And due to our life, as in our family life, I'm a Londoner. We'd lived in London. My husband got a role in Wales. We moved. There were lots of things that we could easily go, oh, maybe it's that. Maybe it's that. Mm-hmm. And then, after a year, 18 months of settling in Wales, it was like, that's still happening. We need to stop saying, oh, it's this and this. We felt that we were constantly walking on eggshells.
Yes.
I remember giving my son a biscuit bar and it was broken, and, the sensory overwhelm, and being so confused of like, what, why, how. Fast forward on, when my son was 9, I had a conversation with a really good friend back in London. We'd gone home to see some friends and family just before the Christmas break. And I described a scenario, and she said to me, you might want to look up PDA. My brain was so overwhelmed. I was so tired. I was so exhausted. I actually typed the letters in a text to myself, which I now think is crazy. But I was sat like, I'm going to forget what she's just said.
Are you kidding? I do that all the time. I just got to tell you. All the time.
While I'm sitting here, I need to be, transparent because of my own identify as ADHD and autistic. I'm sitting here with a fiddle toy and I will be swiveling. 10 days later, a particular, quite an emotional day for me. We'd gone to go somewhere in our local town, and it was the first time I had a glimpse of realizing that the behavior wasn't about control and that there was something much bigger going on. And we got back. It was over the Christmas period, because here in the UK, we have like 2 weeks of like Christmas festivities. And I Googled PDA. And this is going back when there wasn't a great deal. It was just 8 years ago. And I'll never forget the shivers down my arms, crying, that light bulb moment, which is, quite significant within most information out around PDA. I grabbed my husband and went, come and read this. And he was like, have they just written about our son?
Yeah.
And then I feel quite privileged because of being somebody who lived in London. There was some training a couple of months, down the line, and I was able to go down and do a day's training. And I just remember crying through the whole day's training, because the validation,
yes,
being with other family members who had similar stories of issue, it's not, you just need to be tougher.
Yes.
Put tighter boundaries in. You need to remove tech or remove whatever it was at the time. You need to make them So I sat there just crying. And I came back, and I believe in a lot of things, and I don't, it was more than a coincidence. My husband had to go back to London for some training, and that the same course was the Monday after. His course was Monday to Friday, and he did the course, which meant that we were really able to sort of, pardon me, able to power off each other and remind each other of the strategies. Oh, that was a bit of a demand. Make a joke.
So can I interrupt you for a minute? Because I want to use our time really well. Is that okay? So let's pull back and explain to people, what is this thing, whether you call it a demand avoidant profile or a diagnosis of its own, or so
absolutely.
PDA, pathological demand avoidance, is, how would you define it succinctly?
So the key features are resists and avoids ordinary demands of life. Will use social strategies as part of that avoidance. Often appears sociable, but may lack that deeper understanding. May focus more on people versus, whereas atypically with autism, it might be things, so cars or trains or objects. The experience of excessive mood swings, impulsivity, which I would now probably say more about the survival mechanism of feeling safety, that right. Needing to feel safe. And for us, by doing the course, and everything that I've done is changing my parenting 360 degrees, changing my language. And I've spent, I'd sit there thinking, how do I ask? When they're small, you can play games, are you going to put your shoes on here or here? Or I'm going to have my food and I'm sitting here. Do you fancy joining me?
So really, before we go to solution, let's pull back a little bit and understand it in a little more detail.
Of course.
Okay. And Diane, I want to ask you to kind of jump in and clarify what you need clarified, because you're not as familiar with it. So I think that'll be helpful. But let me start with what I heard you say was resists the normal and avoids the demands of life. There was something else you said that I missed. The second thing.
Using social strategies as part of avoidance.
What does that mean?
So using social strategies, so using what would appear as everyday things or stories. So I can't go and take my plate to the dishwasher. My arms don't work. No, I can't go to, let's go to the park. No, I can't go to the park. My legs don't work anymore. Okay. So those social strategies, when we were looking at getting and seeing and asking for an autistic diagnosis, I'd often say I felt like my home was like a circus if we were endeavoring to get out. There was like a whirlwind of things. So not I would never say naughty, but I'd be firefighting, trying to catch. And again, that's
trying to catch the wind, right? Yeah. So let me just get through the things, and then Diane, please clarify. So using social strategies as part of avoidance, which tends to be social, but lacks sort of a deeper insight about social dynamics, focuses more on people than things like trains or cars, impulsive mood swings, which are underneath that is really needing to feel safe.
Yeah.
Those are the highlights. I remember when I first learned about it, and this is going back 13, 14 years, there was another piece about a tendency to get into stories, to really play around stories with.
Yeah.
Can you say something about that? Because that's the one that had me crying.
Yeah, role playing. Sorry, I forgot that piece. Yes, so the importance of role play, and that can appear really differently over different areas. So, it could be with gaming, really getting into that role. It could be, we see it within the autistic community that perhaps young people pretending to be a particular animal, cat or dog, to the point that they'll very much believe that they are. Well, I can't get ready for bed because I'm a dog, and dogs don't go and sleep in a bed. But also I've spoken with adult PDAs who've shared how they've used the role play to support themselves to do boring jobs. So, for example, Kate said that to be able to clean her home, she got one of the old-fashioned 1960s pennies and took on the role like, a cleaner and not.
I love it.
Yeah.
Diane's heard me tell the story of superheroes to the grocery store a million times, and that's a great explanation of that. So Diane, what's coming up for you? What questions are you wanting?
Well, I think that so I've got a couple of clients who have kids with PDA, and I know a lot of the parents that are listening to this are struggling with kids who are pushing back. I'm going to use that language. Kids with autism, kids with anxiety. And I think a lot of times when something is, whether we call it a diagnosis or a tendency or whatever it is, parents want to figure out, does my kid fit in this box? And if my kid fits in this box, what do I do? Do I do something different? Do I need to go to the doctor? Do I need to, it's this sort of, and so a lot of the things you're describing are things that this is all a continuum, right? This is all, and the question is, what's important about whether my kid crosses the line and is a PDA kid, or whether my kid is just struggling, as you were talking about earlier, with control or with feeling safe. And I think that I want to talk a little bit about what difference does a diagnosis make almost. And I don't know whether we go into it that way or not, Elaine, but I think there are a lot of parents are
let's
sitting there thinking, does my kid have PDA? And not, hey, these are behaviors, regardless of what your kid's diagnosis or not. Some of the things that you're going to talk about in terms of supporting the behaviors are true regardless of whether the diagnosis is there. Is that fair?
And I think personally, and I've had this conversation with quite a few people recently, that PDA strategies work, I personally feel, that all children, because it's about connection, collaboration, working with our young people. You've got Dr. Ross Green, who's got Plan B, collaboration, about collaboration, and looking at what skills are they lacking and how do we support them. And even if, they are autistic or they are, hey, who knows? However, scaffolding to support them is what we need to do. And learning to meet them where they're at. And I'm happy to share that, I don't know if you guys call it high school. I get that our terminology can be different. So when my son went to high school at 11, they packed their rucksack with all the different books they need. I was happy and I'd pack it for him right up till he was in the third year. So he's 13, 14. And then one day he just started to do it himself. Any other family, if I'd mentioned this, would have gone, what do you mean you don't make him do it? Some people who are listening might be going, but when will they know how, they've got to learn to live in the real world. What I've noticed, the more I've let go, the more I have given those skills, I've modeled, I've shown how to do it, then my boys are able to. My eldest is able to cook, empty a dishwasher, use the washing machine. All those skills that I hear and read, and you probably do. But if we do everything for them, they'll never do. When life is calm, and I use the word calm, so when there are not as many demands, my son is able to do these things. And so if anybody's listening and what to do, well, they need to learn, or they've got to. Guess what? If I right now sat with you and said, right, you now need to create a new program on a website, there'll obviously be one person who is able to do that stuff. But most people will be like, well, I don't know how. Well, you just got to go and do it. Most of us will go into freeze, fight, form, we'll be like, oh. And that's what it's like for our kids. And there's so much more coming out around that safe feeling of safety. And I don't naturally work very well like you. I hosted a summit And when I'm getting 5 billion things coming, that's not, questions, my head freezes. So why do we expect our children to be able to work?
Yeah, I think that's brilliant. Hi, it's Elaine. And if you like this podcast, you'll love our coach approach. Whether you're a parent looking for support or a professional supporting families, we invite you to download a free guide with 12 key coaching tools at impactparents.com/gift. You can begin using a coach approach to help kids become more independent or improve all of your conversations at work and at home. That's impactparents.com/gift. There's a word that we've used a few times that I really want to focus in on, because the language that I often use is control. As a neurospicy human, I understand that very often my brain feels out of control. And so I do all kinds of things to try to help myself feel in control. And so my story is similar to yours, Nicola, except for my child was significantly older. So when I discovered PDA, my kid was 16. And when I read the piece about the character, and my kid, by the way, is an actor. And so like all of the stuff about the pretend and the role play and the gaming, it made them so good at acting, right? And so when I came to them with what I found, we both started crying. It's like, oh my God, Mom, that's me. Yeah, it's you, So there was this, and I remember the first time I met another parent at a conference who had a kid with PDA, because like for years, I'd never spoken to anybody about it. But for us, the way they and I talk about it is about, I don't want to feel controlled. I want to feel in control. And you said something about it's not about control. So can we talk a little bit about what's going on with control for people with PDA?
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult. It's my learnings and talking with adult PDAs and some of the research. I think when we frame the words control, we're saying it's as if they have it's a choice. And I think this is where language is really interesting, because if we are parenting and believing they have a choice about the way they are doing things.
Okay.
And when you look at my mug, can't, not won't.
Yes.
It probably won't show properly. I think the more we focus on what it is that we can support our young people or adults and to support them to feel safe. Yes. When you, me, and Diane, when we feel safe, we're able to flourish and thrive. That is no different for our PDAs.
Yeah, the language we use for that is it naughty or neurological?
Yeah.
Right. And to help parents understand that this behavior is not naughty. It's not that they won't. It's that they can't right now.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean they'll never be able to, as you were saying earlier, but that they can't right now at this moment.
Yeah. And they often need to choose. So my 16-year-old, because we do exams here, really big exams, I mean, far too many in my mind, he's sitting 20 GCSEs, even though there's 8 subjects. We're in very early days. He's doing them because it's what he's driven to do them. And it's that drive, which is where, you and I spoke before about pervasive desire of autonomy that some PDAs, adult PDAs use. That drive, the drive is strong enough, then the PDA will go with that flow.
Although I will tell you, my kid has said it. I've seen some things on social media that sometimes they even resist their own demands.
Oh, yeah.
The greatest frustration is that they've decided they want to do it, and then they see it as, well, I don't want to, like, they resist their own themselves. I mean, that's really complicated.
That is, and actually, absolutely. And thank you for saying that, because yes, I was going to give a personal example of ours, but also Julia Daunt, who's spoken at every summit that I've hosted. She said that, she can avoid things that she really enjoys. And this can be the most frustrating bit as a PDA. She loves crafting. And there are times where that is just one too many demands. I'll share this story because a lot of families, it may resonate. When my son was a bit younger, we had a gaming cafe. I don't know if you guys have got them, where there's, all the different Xbox and all of that. And he had been there before. He was going with somebody he liked, or he was meeting someone he liked. And I had really got thrown because I sort of was like, yeah, we'll just go. And I stopped because he couldn't. And I hadn't done that sort of work and realized and added in a lot of extra time. Right. He did go, but we were late, and that isn't a term I normally use anymore. But I was really thrown off course because I was like, it ticks all his favorite boxes. He's doing something he really likes. He really liked the friend he was meeting. He'd been there before. And I think that's something to mark as well. But yeah, I got completely thrown that it was something he wanted to do, but that internal demand was just too much.
Well, and you just said something. So I've been doing this for a long time. And part of what happened for me is we discovered that the coach approach actually works for particularly well for kids with PDA, because it's all about fostering a sense of agency and empowerment and collaboration, all the things you've talked about. And so I kind of fell into it backwards, if you will. I had no idea that's what was working, but it was working. But what I just had this realization that one of the things that really worked with our kids in terms of mornings was they asked me for extra time in the morning. We were trying to help make mornings better. And when they came to me and said, we don't like to rush, we need to get up earlier. And I was like, you don't want to get up earlier. You guys hate getting up. They're like, no, we need the time to piddle around in the morning in order to make it to school. And I never made that link until what you just said, that they need the extra time so that they feel the calm, so that they can feel the self-agency and the control. Is that what I just heard you say?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, and what I'm hearing underneath it, just to encapsulate a little bit, is we're talking about transition management on some level. And what you're describing, you're trying to help a kid do a thing that they want to do or that they enjoy doing. And you're figuring out, how do I meet them where they are? This human is having a struggle. And instead of trying to pull them from here to there, you're really meeting them here and going, how do I walk you through the process of getting into the thing that you want to do, or getting into the thing that we've decided is a good next step, or whatever, if it's more collaborative or if it's more self-agency.
Definitely. And when I said, I would like to put a pin in, when I was sharing that example, the other thing is, I think the biggest thing for many of us, if we're family members or professionals, is just because I could do it yesterday doesn't mean I can do it today or tomorrow. And right. That neurons full stop. So this is for everybody listening to this. I don't necessarily like the term spiky profile, but it's diverse. And so, we're not always, just because we could do it yesterday, we may be able to do it in a month's time, but there is that sort of spiky. It's not that natural progression. And the more that I believe is in our minds, and letting go of, but Johnny did it yesterday.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the words expectations and demands are not that far apart from each other, y'all. And so, we see it as, well, this is what we expect of you. And they're experiencing it as feeling like it's being demanded of them. And that nuance, I think, is a lot of and if we understand how to set appropriate and reasonable expectations, meeting them where they are, as you say, and as we say, then we can help guide them through to be more and more successful in their lives.
Well, and to, again, I'm trying to simplify this as much as I can. What I'm hearing from you guys is anything that's perceived as a demand creates a sense of insecurity and in not feeling
lack
safe.
Of safety.
And when we don't feel safe, we go into fight or flight, fawn or freeze, right? It's this sort of, what you're watching is the animal in your child's body or the animal in your body shutting down because it feels like, oh, wait, I can't handle this situation, period.
And that's exactly what it feels like, isn't it? Like, boom. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think the more, I really believe in this, that 90% of families, if there's a neurodivergent child, there will be a neurodivergent parent somewhere. And the dynamic disability was the word I was struggling to grab. The joys of my dyslexia, I can forget words I want to use.
But you know the syllables, so I gotcha. I'm with you.
I think, going with what a young person or child needs and wants makes it so much simpler. And when we can really let go, which is why you guys are doing such an awesome job of working with families, because for me, that is the work. And the more we all step away from the behaviorist approaches and all of those of our children or adults or whoever are the ones that are wrong and we need to fix them, versus we need to change our mindset, our expectations, our way of what we expect. However, having some non-negotiables, but not having a long list. I think we used to have 2 or 3 non-negotiables, but those were discussed. I didn't say to you, now my non-negotiable is, we'd be discussing that before.
Yeah. So we need to wrap this conversation.
Yeah, we could talk forever on this.
I could talk for you. Yes. It's such a pleasure to be in the space of somebody else who understands this. Because when who is dealing with this, it does feel a little, you're often made to feel wrong and you're often judged. And so it's truly a pleasure. Thank you. Thank you for being here and for what you're doing. Diane, I think this is the right next question is, Nicola, tell us how people can find out more about you.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yep. Let's do that.
Oh, thank you, ladies. So I have a website called the PDA Space.
Yeah, we'll have it on
We'll have a link down below.
Yeah.
I have a logo of a tree because I feel that we need those roots and that energy and that we blossom out and to be there to support. So the PDA Space, like you guys, I hold a summit. I have a membership where I support families, and there's loads of free resources, the blogs and ebooks that are on the website.
And you have a free gift for the audience for those who are here. And so we'll make that available as well. Go ahead.
Yeah, there's going to be a webinar. Sorry, Elaine. A webinar to talk you through a little bit more about what is PDA, how to support, just the initial steps. A webinar to support families.
Beautiful.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that.
Anything else?
No, I think the question is so how do we wrap this up? Nicola, it's been delightful. Is there something that we haven't, something brief and short that we haven't covered that we want to either button this up with
or go back and highlight? Yeah.
I think it really is, if families are struggling with behavior, is to step back. And as you said about transitions, everything is a transition. Everything. Coming off again, us ending, it's a transition.
Yeah.
And remembering it's a can't, not a won't.
Yeah, beautiful.
We're all doing the best we can with what we have.
Exactly. Beautiful.
So as we wrap up, do you have a favorite quote or a motto you'd like to share with our audience?
Yeah. So one of my favorite ones is, I don't make mistakes. They're just learning moments.
Beautiful.
Oh, I love that.
I love that. In the coaching world, we call it failing forward. I don't make mistakes. They're just learning moments.
Yeah. And I hope that it gives families that compassion.
Yes. Yeah.
Because I think
so much of
anybody who's listening
has been about compassion, isn't it?
Anybody who has chosen to link in and listen to your summit, they are doing so much.
Right.
However, they'll be giving themselves the hardest time. And the more that we remember that we don't make any mistakes, they're just learning moments. And we are working so, so hard.
Well, it was so funny on our, like total non sequitur, but on our Facebook group this morning, this mom was going on and on about all the things she's doing. And she's like, and I feel like a bad mom. And I'm like, oh, you're doing all these things. You're doing amazing things. I'm like, I don't want to tell you you're not a bad mom, but you're not a bad mom.
Yeah.
It's just never good enough, isn't it?
Oh,
it's so hard because we want for these kids so much. And that's really,
Yeah.
All right, friends, it's been a great conversation. Nicola, I hope this is the beginning of many conversations. It's a pleasure to know you, and I'm looking forward to more. And to those of you listening, take a moment, ask yourself, what am I taking away from this conversation? What's the insight that you're bringing with you that you want to bring forward with you into your lives?
And thanks for what you do for yourself and for your kids. At the end of the day, you make the difference.
Take care, everybody. All
All
right.
right.
So
What a great conversation.
that was awesome. I needed that so much. You guys have, like, I wish I could express. You remember when she was talking about that they take on characters, they become they might become a character. So when my eldest child was about 3, they became Dorothy from The Wizard of Oz for about 2 years. So they dressed the part. I was Auntie Em. David was Uncle Henry. When their younger sibling was born, she was the mayor of the Munchkin City. And like they were Dorothy for about 2 years. And we had all different sizes of like the red shoes. Thank you, Target. And I mean, like we just kind of played into it for years, but we had no idea really what we were dealing with. We just thought it was really creative in those years. But that was an expression of this. They kind of got into Dorothy so much that they role played Dorothy for 2 years. Like,
well, and I think that's the piece. It feels, and I'm taking us back to the conversation about safety. And it's almost in that instance, it's like, I don't quite feel safe being me. So I'm going to create this imaginary world is one piece that I want to highlight. And then the other piece, Elaine, I want to highlight for our audience, because it's such an important piece and so much about why people end up in our community. Is even in this moment, I mean, you've been doing this for years. You do this professionally, and having someone witness for you something that you saw in your kid, but just watching your face was so powerful. And so folks, like, that's why we're here. That's why we're doing this, because we all feel alone. We all feel like we're the only ones going through this stuff. And there's such power in being able to go, oh, wait, it's not me. Oh, wait, I'm not a bad parent. Oh, wait, my kid's not 1 in a million. My kid is struggling, and it makes sense that my kid is struggling. And oh, by the way, there are things that I can do that might help and shift the struggles that we're having as a family.
Yeah. So much came up for me as you were saying that. So I was listening with a couple of lenses. One is that this kid who was, a 4-year-old and then a 16-year-old is now almost a 30-year-old. And so part of what I was listening for was, because they're aware of this, is what would serve them and support them in this
as an adult kid. Yeah.
The other thing that just became clear to me as you were talking about putting on that persona is that this kid is trans non-binary. And I think that as a 2-3-year-old, it was hard to be a girl. And so they became Dorothy because that was a kind of classic, healthy expression of
girlhood,
right, who is lost in another land. I mean, it's like I look at it now, I could do a full literary analysis on it. It's fascinating, but I think that's what was happening. The other thing I wanted to share in this conversation with you was, I know I referenced, and many of you have heard me talk about superheroes to the grocery store.
Yeah.
That is a story we use to talk about motivation when we're talking about how people choose motivation to get themselves to activate to do things that are hard to do. And we've talked, if you've been in Sanity School or group coaching, Sanity School Premium, or anything else we've done, you've learned pinch at some point or another. Yeah. And the story was about, I needed my kids to go to the grocery store, and my eldest, and they didn't want to because we had just had a death in the family. And my eldest knew we needed them to do it. And so they finally looked at their siblings and said, okay, everybody, superheroes to the grocery store. And they put on capes and tights and shorts. And I mean, it was adorable, but it's what they needed to get themselves to want to do it. Right.
And whether it's because they need motivation or they need safety.
Right.
I mean, I think that this is the thing underneath it. It's taking that moment as a parent to go, what are all the things that might be going on for our kids right now? So often, especially because a lot of what we witness in our kids are what I would call avoidance behaviors, right? It's just sort of I'm overwhelmed and I shut down. I mean, I happen to be, when I personally get overwhelmed, I like bounce into the moment and I'm getting stuff done because that's part of what happens. But a lot of times
I shut down.
these kids shut down, right? And it's this sort of, how do I see the avoidant behavior and go, oh, wait, my kid is it's not about avoidance. It's about overwhelm. It's not about avoidance. It's about safety.
So let's look at it. So they shut down, they take control, which often means pushing back, right?
Yep.
They
So
get
it's both
angry.
control and avoid, right?
Right. Well, so these are all avoidance behaviors, actually, I think is what you're saying, which I love. They get angry. What else could they do? Right.
I think that's the
capture it.
thing, that every kid is going to do this a little bit differently. I mean, I don't know about your clients, and we're not just talking about PDA here. I think we're talking about kids who are in avoidance modes, and everyone is different. And I love that the quote that it's like any unwanted behavior is a signal.
Symptom.
And
Yeah.
a signal or a symptom, whatever we want to say, but it's like
Yeah.
this sort of, if I go, okay, this behavior is not okay versus this behavior is telling me something. Something's going on with this kid. Okay, let's imagine for a minute this kid is avoiding what it is that might be hard for them. Not what are they avoiding? I mean, yes, there are going to be times that we avoid things that are hard for us, but it doesn't mean we should just push through. We might need to help these kids to feel safe or help these kids to feel less overwhelmed so that they can then engage in whatever it is that's desired to be done or wants or needs to be done.
Yeah. So I think what I was trying to land, and I think you just spoke to it, was when they exhibit behaviors, or our partners or whomever, right? Shutdown, control, angry, redirection, of like all of those things could be avoidance, right? That avoidance isn't just the obvious stuff. Sometimes if I can redirect, if I can change the subject, if I can turn the attention to something else, if like I think about years of arguments with my husband where we're talking about something and then all of a sudden we're arguing about how we're arguing about it or how we're talking about it instead of actually talking about the thing, that's an avoidance.
Yeah.
Right? Because that means I don't have to talk about the hard thing. Now I can talk about, I don't like the way you said that to me. And I'm no longer talking about, I really want you to close the seat, right? Whatever the example is.
You guys fought over that? That's
No,
amazing.
that's why I used it, because it was
All
not
right.
but to recognize that we may be missing when it's an avoidance. I think that's what I'm trying to get to.
Yeah.
Right. We may be seeing the behavior and not understanding that there's an avoidance underneath because there's something uncomfortable. Go.
Well, and I think that's just even that language. We were talking about language in the interview with her, and it's the word control, the word avoidance. It's this sort of, we'd use the word avoidance as a bad thing. As opposed to avoidance is a natural response to not feeling safe or not feeling
right. It's
able to engage, right? It's just sort of, and I think that's what happens is like, oh, my kid's just avoiding their homework. Well,
yeah.
Because they don't feel they're not regulated enough. And I think that this is a thing. It's like they're not regulated enough to engage in their homework. It's a completely different way to say the same thing.
Yeah, or they don't feel safe, or they don't feel confident, or they don't feel competent, or they're perfectionists and they're afraid they're going to do it wrong. Like that's when my kid used to say, "Don't you see if I don't do it, I don't do it wrong."
Right.
Like
and all of those are just like their emotional body is taken over, and they can't engage with their mental body because they're too flooded with emotions. Like flooded might be a good word too.
So I want to say one more thing about PDA that Nicola referenced, but we didn't really explain. So PDA is, the definition is pathological demand avoidance. Really ugly term, I think. I mean, it's worse than ADHD, and that's saying something. And we do have a link on the reading carousel to a workbook for PDA. So I'll make sure that there's a link about for you to have access to. But there has been a movement in the community that Nicola was referencing to call it something else. Pervasive desire for agency is one term that I've heard. Persistent desire for autonomy is another term that I've heard. So if you hear those other terms, what that is all about is the autistic community wanting to reclaim the language and make it serve them and work for them.
And not feel so
It's so much more empowering. And I think we see that happening in the world of autism more than in the world of ADHD, which is, I'm going to stop masking and coming to you. I want you to come to me. I want the world to come to me more. And so shifting it to desire for autonomy is a way of saying, you come to me. This is important to me. But I'm sharing it because I think understanding that those are all referencing the same thing from different viewpoints is really important.
Yeah. Awesome.
You've been listening to the Parenting with Impact podcast with Elaine and Diane. For more information on the Impact Parents community or to join Sanity School for Parents, please visit impactparents.com. If you like what you've heard, please share this podcast with friends who need similar guidance and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. For the essentials of Elaine and Diane's coach approach to parenting, download a free tip sheet at impactparents.com/podcast.
Behavior therapy training for parents is actually recommended as a first-line treatment for complex kids. For information about Sanity School, our training program for parents or teachers, which has helped thousands of families around the globe, visit impactparents.com/sanityschool.